Welcome back to AI, Algorithmic Inequity. We're your hosts, Claire
And Ellen.
and today we'll be focusing on how bias appears in generative AI and how these algorithms perpetuate systemic forms of oppression. So I wanted to start off this episode with a little conversation about what bias is and what oppression is. So do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I mean, oppression is sort of like the unjust, unfair, unequal treatment of certain people in society based on where they come from, gender, skin color, sexuality, and things like that. And it exists in every institution and is embedded within the system of how society was built. And then it's because of this that, racism and homophobia and misogyny exist. And then it can do serious harm to people from marginalized communities who are marginalized because of systemic oppression. And it exists on an interpersonal level as well, but that sort of comes from the system and the things that we're taught, even if that's implicitly. I think all of us hold sort of certain beliefs that we need to do the work to unlearn.
And I think too, a lot of it, some of the times is unconscious.
Yeah.
And people don't realize that they have these biases or that they're committing these microaggressions and stuff like that. And then they can get defensive about it and think that it's not a problem and that they're not doing anything when they are causing, maybe not, huge amounts of harm, but harm is still harm.
And it can build up.
And it can build up. And then it just, it's not a great thing.
And I think calling it out, if somebody says something that is sort of hateful, even if it is accidentally, doesn't mean that we're necessarily calling you a bad person, but things need to be called out so that we can learn from it and change.
In our society, bias and different forms of oppression can be found everywhere. Interestingly enough, when it comes to AI, its algorithms are also susceptible to bias. In an article written about the risks concerning the future of AI technology, titled Risk and Future of AI, Algorithmic Bias, Data Colonialism, and Marginalization, algorithmic bias is defined as the phenomenon whereby algorithms that are not exposed to subgroup data, for example, that of marginalized groups, enforce bias upon the subgroup. As a result, a digital divide is created that further perpetuates data inequality towards marginalized and racialized groups, which includes women in the workforce. More specifically, health data poverty begins to occur. This is an underrepresentation of marginalized groups in health research data. The algorithm that is used does not have the ability to ascertain the difference between light and dark-skinned people physiologically, which highlights the structural inequality within society. The article argues further that digitization is not distributed equitably when individuals need to access basic services, health and otherwise.
Yeah, and xenophobia is another form of harm, bias, and discrimination that AI can perpetuate. And xenophobia is defined as a fear, dislike, or hate towards people who are perceived to be different, including their culture, customs, and it has been associated with a range of psychological roots in an article called Manifestations of Xenophobia in AI Systems. So, if somebody is from another country or speaks a different language, they may face xenophobic discrimination and oppression. And again, this can be exacerbated by the intersection with gender, sexuality, and race. And it crosses over with racism quite a lot. And this is an important discussion to have in terms of intersectionality when looking at the impact AI can have on women and women's work. And many AI systems don't detect racial hate speech, and they can also flag queer speech as inappropriate. So an example is that AI systems can prioritize the medical benefits of citizens over immigrants, and immigrant workers aren't always granted the same rights and protections as citizens.
Mm-hmm.
And as well as this, AI art has also been found to contain cultural stereotypes.
So we wanted to have a little discussion about where we've seen AI in art. Do you have any examples to start with?
Yeah, I think we've all seen it all over social media. There's a lot of it on Instagram and TikTok, and I think like some companies are starting to use it as well to generate like promotional material and logos and things like that.
Mm-hmm. And have you seen those there's like compilations on TikTok where they're like, I remember I keep seeing these of like a day in the life of this thing in this place.
Yeah.
And it's like entirely made with AI and it just looks so weird.
Yeah.
Like I saw one this morning where it was like the day in the life of a cat in Paris or something.
Oh.
And I was just like, what is this? Like what is the point of making this? Just to get like views or whatever.
Yeah, I don't get it. And there's other ones that show like how fashion has changed throughout history.
I've seen a lot of those.
I get loads that are how TVs have changed throughout history from whenever it was invented until now, and then it goes into the future as well. But it just, yeah, they're really weird, and I don't understand why they need AI to do that.
Yeah.
When there are real like images of real things that we can use to show that.
Like I feel like that's like coming from like an English perspective. I feel like it's like an archives thing.
Yeah.
Of like, or even in our other gender studies class. Like it's like there's totally, I'm sure there's archives of that stuff that you could probably, I don't know how open access it would be, but I'm sure if you were like, hey, I want to make like an educational video of how this stuff has changed over history, you could totally find stuff online for that and not just ask AI to make it for you.
Yeah. And you can, but even just like Google Images has pictures of fashion from the 50s and old-fashioned TVs and radios and things like that. And like the images are really weird as well, because especially when it's people, because they look sort of real, but you can tell that it's not.
I've seen things where it's like they'll have like 6 fingers or something.
Yeah.
Like there's just something where it looks like if you didn't know where to look and you weren't well versed enough to understand like when it looks like AI, then you would just be like, oh, this is just a normal. But there's always something I find lately. I can always just like there's just something a bit off about it. Like there's just something that like it's like an uncanny kind of like it's like an uncanny valley feeling.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah.
It's just like that's not real.
Yeah, because. And even just like the images are all really like smooth and sort of I find them disturbing as well.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I also think it's important to bring in sort of how if AI art is replacing the work that actual artists are doing, like companies are using AI to generate like logos and like promotional posters instead of hiring like a graphic designer or somebody to draw something. That's going to put a lot of people out of a job as well.
Yeah, like for us, like we hired a student to make our logo.
We did, yeah.
And we could have just like gone on Canva or we could have just asked AI to do it for us, but that would not only go against the whole point of this, but also just like why would we do that when we can ask somebody who has experience doing art to be like, do you want to get paid for this? Like, let me pay you for your art.
Yeah. And I think in relation to women as well, Galleries West published an article last year saying that around 2/3 of visual art and craft artists in Canada were women. And that statistic included cis women, trans women, and some non-binary people as well. But I think that just shows how sort of like the gendered aspect of how AI is going to disproportionately affect like women and non-binary people.
This issue of algorithmic bias leads us to the concept of automated oppression. So this form of oppression is created through machine learning-based algorithms, and these algorithms, which consist of sequences of functions to predict any given set of input data, they show patterns of profiling racial minorities as having comparable life conditions. So, for example, in an article titled Conformism, Ignorance, and Injustice, AI as a Tool of Epistemic Oppression, AI will perceive these racial minorities as being financially isolated from others. And it's in the machine's design, since it's created by dominant social groups, that it perpetuates bias and oppression, which results in a systematic marginalization of minority information. Furthermore, AI fails to understand what exactly oppression and injustice is because of how it has been created, equaling a fundamental communicative failure on the part of the teams who created the machine. So overall, there is a worrying inclination for AI to be used as a tool of oppression, and there is no current mechanism looking into the risks of this in future implications for social and industrial disruptions. So I wanted to have a little conversation about what do we think this kind of mechanism that would look at these risks, what would that look like and how would that be created?
I think maybe something that is able to see where biases are, or where information that could contain certain stereotypes is, that can perhaps screen for that sort of thing, or have, even just before, this is kind of a more difficult thing I think, but just before the systems are made, to sort of check for your own biases as well, maybe.
And I think this is something that we have discussed and we'll discuss more, but just having diverse and inclusive teams working to create the mechanisms, because like I said, where it's dominant groups, which is white men, they're creating this, and they're kind of, if we think of it as a hierarchy, they're at the top who have the most privilege and have experienced the least or no oppression in their life. And so when they're making these systems that are going to be used by marginalized communities, if they're the ones creating it, they're not going to make it so that the machine will understand what oppression even is, which is what the article was talking about. So I think some kind of machine that works within the machine to screen it and to look at where unconscious bias could come in, and to figure out ways and have teams that their job is to figure out ways to make it less biased by implementing their own personal data. I'm not entirely sure how it all works with that, but if you think of it as the white men putting in the data that they put in is their own experience, if then you had marginalized communities who are putting in their own data as well of their experiences, then it kind of makes it more diverse and less susceptible to bias.
Yeah, and I think just on the teams, as well as having diversity, because that will obviously improve, make it less biased towards one group of people controlling the whole thing, but also have maybe just thought experiments where people can test for their own biases and just see, because a lot of it is unconscious.
Yeah, and it makes me think, I don't know, I can't remember what these kinds of things are called, but it's I think it's in advertising and marketing, they'll have groups of people that they'll pick, I think they pick random groups of people, and they'll come in and they'll sit down at a table and they'll be here's our product, tell us what you think of it as real consumers. So that kind of, again, I don't remember what that's called, but that kind of thing of here's our machine, and run it, kind of what we're doing in the class with our own projects of we're going to try and run them and see how they work, and if there's problems, then we'll take that into consideration and fix it. And so it's just bouncing off ideas off each other, instead of just being this is my thing and it's perfect because I made it and it'll work,
Yeah, and just similarly, when you write a paper for a class, having somebody else read it just to go through it, just to see any small mistakes you might have made that you didn't notice, because that happens all of the time. When we read our own work, we don't see it, but then when somebody else reads it, they can pick it out and be oh, perhaps you could change this.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good idea. Yet another concept introduced by Couldry and Mejias is data colonialism, which refers to the process of domination and control of data by countries and corporations in the global north over those in the global south. So these entities exploit the data that they receive from those in the global south by giving them less financial compensation and restricting access to the health care they need because of the labor they perform. So essentially, the global north is appropriating data for profit in exchange for value, resulting in a power imbalance between the colonizer and the colonized. And put another way, quote, AI can further marginalize the marginalized. So what does the term data colonialism make you think of? And like, how does this colonialism contribute and continue to contribute to AI?
I think one thing that I think of are sort of colonial ways of collecting data and doing research, and the harm that research on certain marginalized groups has caused before. So like research on indigenous peoples and the harm that has caused, whereas like today we aim to use like indigenous research methods,
like epistemologies and stuff.
yeah.
And I think it makes me think of, I think it's kind of like a way of like how colonialism, like settler colonialism, is still very much ongoing, and how a lot of people would like to think like, oh, that's a thing of the past, like we don't colonize places anymore. And it's like, even if you're not physically, kind of like imperialism where you're just like going to these places and you're like taking over, like that's not the only way that colonialism works. And it can work like this, where you exploit the people in a certain country or community for their resources, and in this case with the data that helps make AI. And I think the article too kind of talked about like not only like the data, which is kind of like immaterial, but also like the material things, like what it takes to build the machines that generate the AI. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And how that kind of works too.
And like, I also think it could be about like how numbers on their own don't necessarily tell us that much, and how like, as well as like collecting like statistics and numbers, we also need to look at the qualitative research aspects as well, that give a lot more sort of background information, and not just information, but just like a broader understanding of like people and why things are the way they are beyond just numbers.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So according to the UN Women's article on AI and gender equality in 2024, AI is mirroring the gender bias found in society, seen through the number of women who have internet access globally, which is only 20%. So that kind of works what we were talking about with data colonialism.
Yeah.
Furthermore, AI technology has been trained to associate certain characteristics and skills with different genders, which creates biased content for users. So this goes back to the bias found in algorithms, and the UN Women found that when it was asked to create a story about a doctor and a nurse, AI made the doctor male and the nurse female. So this example directly reinforces a gender bias that places men and women in specific roles that caters to biological assumptions of roles according to sex. And if this technology continues to exhibit gender bias, this data gap will continue to widen and result in a lower quality of service and decisions surrounding jobs, healthcare, and more. So what are some other examples that you've encountered or that we've encountered in research and our daily life? And how do these examples mirror gender bias in our society?
I think like occupations is like a good one, where if like a man is a nurse and everyone's like, oh, how can you be a nurse, you're a man, or like if a woman is a doctor, it's like, oh, you're a woman, you know, because that, like, you know, there's that. And there's also like in gender studies, it's sort of a field of study that we have to justify to a lot of people. We always feel like we have to justify ourselves to like a patriarchal society that this is like a legitimate like career and like a real field of study, and it's not something that is just Like I heard so many people complaining about it, even at Mount Allison.
Really?
Like I remember hearing someone complain like, "Oh, there's so many people here studying feminism. Like, why would you do that?" But also, not only is that just stupid, but also you're at a liberal arts university.
Yeah.
What did you expect?
Yeah. Like, and I think that is kind of, to go on that kind of tangent, it makes me think too, like, I remember, like, first year I was like, wow, there's so many science students here. Like, I was just like, I thought this was like an arts school, and everyone I met was in science.
Yeah.
And I had a hard time finding people, like, just out and about that were in the arts. Or if they were in arts, they were like fine arts.
Yeah.
And not just like in like the humanities or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, I thought this was a liberal arts school. Like, where is everybody? So, yeah, it is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, too, on your comment about, like, why is everyone studying feminism? It's like, why wouldn't we study feminism when I feel like it's one of those things where it's like a lot of, stereotypically men, but also women, too, they don't realize how much it affects them because they can only see how it benefits them. And they don't realize that, like, that's not entirely how it works. And, like, why wouldn't I, as a woman, want to learn about feminism and how that stuff impacts my life? And then, like, because I feel like for me, it gives me words and, like, it helps me understand my life, if you will. So, yeah, that was a little tangent, but back to AI. I think, too, we said how we found AI in, like, our research, and, like, how, I think we mentioned this before, about how it's in, like, all the research algorithms. Like, you go onto all these different websites, and it's got an AI, like, helper or whatever.
Yeah,
and
it's
like
everywhere.
It's everywhere. I noticed it too. I think I had seen this before, but I hadn't quite thought about it. Like, it was on Zoom and stuff. Like, there's a little AI thing at the bottom.
Oh yeah,
There's like a companion or whatever. And I think it's funny too. I've noticed this, like, a pattern of, like, it always, when it's like an AI thing, the, like, logo for it, if you will, is always those, like, little sparkles. And so I'm like, that's how I've seen it. I think I've started to notice it more because I see those and I'm like, oh, that's AI. And it's just so embedded now in everything.
But it's like we mentioned before, how when doing research for this, it was showing up in all of the like places where we were doing research. But I think it's relevant to, like, what we mentioned just now as well, about people complaining about, like, gender studies and things like that. It's often the people who are opposed to that are the ones that are in favor of AI, and then that's where a lot of the issues come in, I think.
And I think of it too, if I were to, like, intellectualize it a little bit, like, some of the people that I know or that I've seen who use AI in, like, their work or in their everyday life, it's a little bit like, I think the way that I think about it in relation of what I've noticed is that it's a bit of, like, internalized misogyny, if you will. I don't really know how to explain it, but it's just, like, they have that kind of mindset of, like, just, like, why should I, like, do all of this work if I'm just gonna get, like, I don't know.
Well, yeah.
Like,
exactly.
I'm having a hard time conceptualizing what I'm trying to say, but it's like, why would I put in the effort when I can just get AI to do it for me, and I can just get something that's, honestly, man-made to do it for me, and then they get good marks for it. Yeah. Sometimes, and that's honestly kind of scary, because I'm like, what do you mean that, like, my work that I've done, that I have put all of my time and effort into, and have purposely not used AI for, is getting the same or even lower marks than some people that I know are using AI for it.
Yeah, it's unfair. And I think when, like, professors say, oh, you should know how to use it because your employers will expect you to know how to use it, I think instead of that, we should be thinking, like, but what, like, why? And start, like, challenging that.
Like, go deeper.
Instead of just accepting it.
And, like, look at the root of the problem, if you will.
Well, yeah.
So what can we do about this bias and oppression? And to prevent this gender bias in AI, it must be first addressed in our society. So the UN Women argues for more diverse teams working on AI who are better equipped to flag misrepresented data, like we talked about. And a lack of marginalized perspectives creates inequality and amplifies gender-based discrimination caused by AI. This inclusion starts by hiring more women into information and communication technology, or ICT, fields, who currently only make up about 29% of workers in STEM sectors internationally. And this brings us to the financial side of AI technology, which will be explored more in the next episode.